All right. Welcome to the Metaphysical Bible Hangout. I am Reverend SherriDeniseJames. I am Senior Minister for Understanding Principles Church in Los Angeles, California. This is our Thursday night Bible study, and I'm so grateful that you are here. We do this remotely, although I've been in prayer about how do we turn this into a land-based thing, because I love that interaction when I'm in a class and connecting with people, and there's something just kinetic about that. And I love your questions, because your questions help guide the conversation. Your questions help what we talk about make even more sense. So we are finishing. I cannot believe it. We've been doing this since the summer, but it's been worth it. We took just about a half a year to work through the Hebrew scriptures. And so we're working with this text. It's a workbook designed by the Reverend Dr. Mary Ann Tumpkin, who was my mentor. It says a student's guide to the Hebrew scriptures. And it is really just a remarkable text that she created. And I'm just in awe of her as a teacher, as a scholar, as a thinker. And I'm so grateful that I got a chance to study with her in her lifetime, that I got a chance to be influenced by her, to literally sit up under her, to follow her around the country, wherever she went, to study with her. And my hope is that what she gave me, that I give that back to you, and that it is valuable and it is as life-changing as it was for me. She awakened for me a love of scripture that I didn't even know was possible. I didn't even know it was possible to love the Bible as I do. I don't think that I had a problematic relationship with it, but I was very clear that I didn't have all the information. I was very clear that something was amiss. Something was not true as far as the information that was being shared. And so just the way that she taught, it really liberated me, and it inspired me to search on my own. And I think that's the part that I would love to have an impact, is to cause people to search on their own, to awaken curiosity. So today we're wrapping up. We're on page 95 of the text. I've got our handy PowerPoint. We're going to be looking at the wisdom literature. The wisdom literature is it's a combination of texts. I'm pulling my notes up. It is Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. I feel like that's one. For some reason, Lamentations got dropped, but maybe we did Lamentations earlier and I just forgot. One of the things, though, that you should know about these texts, and I hope it comes through, is that they don't all present the same point of view. They're actually, in a lot of ways, talking to one another or presenting an alternative point of view. And it's one of the things that I would love for you to walk away with just an understanding of scripture in general, especially the Hebrew Bible. The Christian Bible, even then, but none of these, first of all, calling the Bible a book is just an erroneous term. That's just not, you just can't think of the Bible that way. It would be better to think about the Bible as an anthology. And it's an anthology of different points of view on God. And so we'll see that even with the wisdom literature. We saw that last week when we talked about the post-exilic texts, Esther and Ruth and Jonah, and Daniel, that Esther and Daniel in particular were presenting two different points of view on how you respond to tragedy, and tragedy where your life is at stake. And in the book of Daniel, we know these stories very well. The story of Daniel in the lion's den, of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego being put into the fiery furnace. We're very familiar with those stories. And that point of view is trusting in God no matter how bad it gets. Esther is almost like a counterpoint. In the book of Esther, God is not mentioned once. all of the intervening that's done to save not so much humanity, but their people. Same thing for this community. To save their people is done by the actions of Esther and Mordecai working together. And Esther is very much a reluctant hero. She, and many times, doesn't want to take action, but Mordecai appeals to her sense of reason, and the action that she takes actually spares the Jewish community that is in captivity. And because of her actions, there is a feast that's practiced to this day called the Feast of Purim in Judaism that comes out of the book of Esther. So the Bible is not taking a perspective in almost anything. It is really laying it out, giving you different ways to look at it, and then asking you to choose the way that best fits for you. And I was thinking that, maybe it was like, okay, well, it's either or, but maybe it's both and. Maybe at some times it's time for you to get up and act, and then at other times it's time for you to be like Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego and just trust. So, anyway, that was my thought after last week's lesson. You'll see the same thing with Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and with Job, is that they are different points of view. Job is actually a really in-depth book, and I almost want to do just a study on Job because it's so rich and it's so dynamic, and there is no way in this hour that we have together that I'm going to be able to get to all of the information, but I will try to share as much as I can, and then maybe sometime in 2020 we can just do a deep dive into Job, because it's really it's a really powerful book. It's a really powerful commentary on how intimately involved God is with creation, and what that means as to whether or not you should behave as a good person. And the writer, who is really anonymous, seems to have the perspective that you choose righteousness not because you get some reward with God, but you choose righteousness because it's the right thing to do, and it may not have a reward, and you may suffer tragedy, as Job did. So this is very, very fascinating. Anyway, Israelite literature, it belongs to a much wider and broad wisdom legacy or tradition in the ancient Near East. There is very little in biblical wisdom literature apart from its monotheism that lacks a parallel in the wisdom literature of Egypt or Mesopotamia. So these texts are very reflective of the community of the world that they're in, and almost with you don't know, well, did they pull it from Egypt to Mesopotamia or vice versa? That you get this a very close relationship. So ancient Near Eastern wisdom literature is literature that's characterized by a praise of human intelligence, applied to understanding the ways of the world, the ways of society. It tends to contain traditional advice has been found to be tried and true. It tends to be very individually oriented, but at the same time, quite universal and humanistic in its orientation as well. And keeping with this style, Israelite wisdom literature doesn't really speak to the particular historical condition of Israel. So we spent a whole several months working on the historical condition of Israel, which is that the superpower of Assyria rose. First of all, they had some internal pressures that split the kingdom and turned it into Israel and Judah. Then there were external pressures that other countries were able to exploit because they had an internal rift. And so the northern kingdom was taken down by Assyria. Assyria ultimately implodes, but then Babylon comes in and takes down Assyria, and they then take over that taxation relationship that Judah had with Assyria, and then Judah trying to buck the system under Babylon, ends up causing greater calamity. The temple is destroyed. Persia later comes in and conquers Babylon and takes over governance of Judah. So Judah gets renamed Yehud, Yehud. It becomes a province of Persia. Best way to think about it is, because we have relationships like this in the U.S., places like Puerto Rico, it's not a state, but it's a protectorate. So essentially they're under the protection of the United States. They're not an independent nation. If they did try to become an independent nation, for sure, there'd probably be some destabilization stuff happening over there in Puerto Rico. You can also see with like the Grand Cayman Islands. The Grand Cayman Islands they're an island, but they're not independent. They're under British rule. So these relationships, I think, are very, very clear. This was the relationship that Judah had with Persia, or Yehud had with Persia. So what comes along with the Proverbs and the Psalms and Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon and Job is that they don't really speak to what's going on with the people. They're almost timeless pieces that if you open the book today, you could read something that, unless it had the word Yahweh in it, you wouldn't know that it didn't come from some Egyptian wisdom literature or Mesopotamian wisdom literature. Like it's just, it is something that's just been passed down through time. All right, so we are going to look at Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon tonight. And let me get this out of the way. So the wisdom books of the Hebrew Bible are Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. It's characterized, like I said, a praise of human intelligence applied to understanding the ways of the world, the ways of society. It tends to be very individually oriented. So this is stuff that you can use in your life today. But it's also very universal and humanistic in its orientation. It's not trying to tell you what to believe about God so much as it's trying to tell you how to do life. There are two major sources for Israel's interest in wisdom. One is the family, and the second is formal education. One is the family, and the second is formal education. So wisdom literature that we find are what we could call clan or family wisdom. So these materials tend to be common sense aphorisms and observations, the kinds of things that are common to all cultures. They're scattered around the Hebrew Bible, but most of them we find in Proverbs. So for example, like Proverbs 15:7, you'd have better a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fattened ox where there is hate. It's the kind of thing that you can imagine your grandmother or your auntie saying, like Proverbs chapter 20, verse 14. Bad, bad, says the buyer, but having moved off, he congratulates himself. Or Proverbs 26:14, the door turns on its hinge and the lazy man on his bed, and neither of them really gets anywhere. Chapter 25, verse 25, like cold water to a parched throat is good news from a distant land. So many of the Proverbs we classify as clan or family wisdom is parental. They tend to sound as if it's being said to a son, not so much to a daughter, but to a son. And then the second category of wisdom literature is what we call court wisdom. This is that formal education. And we have a lot of this from Egypt. So a great deal of court wisdom came from Egypt to serve the needs of the court. It tends to be bureaucratic advice, administrative advice, career advice, instruction on manners or tact, how to be diplomatic, how to live well and prosper. It's practical wisdom. So for example, Proverbs chapter 24, verse 27, put your external affairs in order. Get ready what you have in the field, then build yourself a home. Or chapter 21, verse 23, he who guards his mouth and tongue guards himself from trouble. Or chapter 11, verse 14, for want of strategy an army falls, but victory comes with much planning. Or chapter 12, verse 1, he who loves discipline loves knowledge. He who spurns reproof is a brutish man. So again, you have these two different categories, these two major sources. The wisdom books differ among themselves in both style and subject matter, but they all have certain characteristics in common, which set them off from other biblical books. That's what goes in that blank. These are the things that set them off from other biblical books. So number one, they have only minimum interest in the great acts of divine salvation. So there is no mention of like the Exodus, right? There's no mention of Sinai or Moses or the covenant or any of the early narratives of the nation. Sometimes there's an attempt to connect wisdom specifically with a belief in Yahweh. But really, biblical wisdom, like ancient Near East wisdom, generally grounds morality on non-specific notions of prudence and God-fearing in a sort of non-specific way, rather than on the historical covenant with Yahweh. So the idea of divine salvation, you don't really get that anywhere in the anywhere in the wisdom literature. They have little interest in Israel as a nation or in its history. Its history is what goes in that blank. So they, like I said, they don't mention Moses. They don't mention Jacob. They don't mention any of the battles to conquer Canaan. They don't mention Joshua. They don't seem to have any interest in the history of the nation. They present a questioning attitude about the problems of life. For example, why is there suffering, inequality, and death, and why the wicked prosper? It's a questioning attitude. So these are, if they were modern day, they'd be our think pieces. Something happens. I just did a deep dive on Watchmen. Anybody watch Watchmen? Nobody, anybody else watching? It may just be me. Anyway, so I just did a binge, mainly because my mom kept saying, you gotta watch. And I'm like, it's the holidays, I'll go ahead and watch. And so I put on Watchmen, and then I do this deep dive. And if you have watched the series, it's a pretty intense series. So now I'm reading all the commentaries about it. So you can think of the Song of Solomon, Job, Proverbs. Those are kind of like the commentaries on stuff, and they don't mention things by name, but it's like they don't mention specific historical incidents by name, but it's like giving you wisdom that you can use. It's like, let's figure this thing out. So they come with this questioning attitude, and they're trying to like solve this mystery, like, why does life happen the way that life happens? So that's what's at stake here. They search for ways to master life and understand how humans should behave before God. They search for ways to master life. So it's, if you think about this, the Proverbs that you've memorized, get wisdom, and all thy getting, get understanding. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Like everything in there, it's about mastering life. And it's also about like, how should you behave before God? They show great interest in universal human experiences that affect all people and not just believers in Yahweh. So again, if you just open the book and it didn't have Yahweh in the text, it could come from any ancient tradition. There's nothing that anchors it specifically to a group of people who worship Yahweh, or this ancient Near Eastern community that evolved into our present day Jewish community. There's nothing that anchors them. This is wisdom. This is timeless wisdom. And so they're interested in the universal human experiences. And so, and number 6, the last thing is that they express a joy in the contemplation of creation and God as creator. They express a joy in the contemplation of creation and God as creator. So there is this interest in what is this, what's going on, what, I want to make sense of this. And you think about so the 8th Psalm, that when I look upon the wonders of your hand, that and who is man that you are mindful of him. It's like pondering these mysteries of the universe, like recognizing that there's something different about man, because man is a sentient being and different in different from any other being, that these ancient peoples that, even though they didn't have, say, the technology that we had, they didn't have the tools that we have, but that didn't stop the deep thinking about the deep things of life. So just know, I did this exercises. I did a sermon years ago now on the spoken word. And so I just went through the Bible and just looked up every verse that had to do with the spoken word. And wherever there was the word or the tongue or anything that was related to speech. And it was so interesting because it was almost like there was this message that was coming through from these ancient communities that had this understanding about the spoken word and its value and the importance of keeping your mouth shut, only speaking words that you want to see rematerialized in your life. And it just, but if you're reading it, the verse in Isaiah, my word goes out and shall not return to me void. There's one in Psalms that I know, I think it's maybe Proverbs, I can't remember, that says a word is like a apple in like a gold apple in a bowl of silver. It's something like that. The tongue, all the writing in James about the tongue. So I went through from Genesis to Revelation, everything that dealt with the word, and it was like this message coming through because split up. The verses are like spread out across 66 books with multiple different points of view, untold number of writers, not all saying the same thing, definitely not all having the same point of view. But when you just pick out the verses that dealt with spoken word, it was really powerful. And so there is this contemplation of, gosh, we're different than animals, that a baby cat is born doing all that it's ever going to be able to do. It's going to grow in strength so it can do the one thing that it does or the two things that it does at on scale, but it's not going to develop a new ability that it does not have at birth, and almost save for, like, say, the butterfly. But even then, butterflies don't evolve to do more than the butterfly can do. No, the caterpillar can't do what the butterfly can do, but the butterfly never does more than the butterfly can do. And with human beings, you are born able to do nothing, and through life can do everything. And these ancient peoples realized that, and they thought about it, and they wrote about it, and they thought about what that meant. And it while they were hunting and gathering, they were also thinking and contemplating and trying to understand, what is this? Who are we? What are we doing here? So anyway, I find that fascinating. So the book of Job. Now, we really don't know the date for the book of Job. It's probably no earlier than the 6th century BCE, which was put it around the time of the exile. But scholars disagree. There are portions that seem to reflect a very old and very ancient tradition. So we're not actually sure. The author of the book of Job, who is anonymous, moves beyond simple acceptance of God's will to ask hard questions of the traditional and overconfident wisdom found in Proverbs and in the prophets. So the author of the book of Job kind of rejects, like it's almost like Job is rejecting what you would find in Proverbs, and almost speaking against it again, because these are not monolithic thought pieces, that they're each presenting a point of view. And my takeaway from last week, as I was contemplating just the conversation that we had, is that maybe it's not either or, like you pick Esther or you pick Daniel or you pick Job or you pick Proverbs, or maybe it's both and. Maybe it's in a particular situation you need to handle it like Job does, or maybe in a particular situation you need to handle it like Esther. The question, though, that Job is asking is, why do the evil prosper and the honest never seem to get ahead? And when you think about the universality of that question, in a lot of ways, we're asking that question right now in our country. So this, for those of you that might be watching this on YouTube, in the year 2023, it is December 19th, 2019 right now. Oh, that's interesting. 12192019. Wonder what that means. Okay. Anyway, December 19th, 2019. And right now we have a circumstance in our country where just the wealth gap is widening. In cities like Los Angeles, we have a homeless population of almost 70,000 people. That is greater than the population of some small towns. You're talking about 70,000 people without homes, living on the street. It's unconscionable. The rents in many areas are just shooting through the roof, where it just becomes, you have people that are paying rent and are paying more than 50% of their monthly income in rent. So then they're never in a real position to get ahead. And so but living in these, large metropolitan areas. And so the question comes, it's like, okay, why do the evil prosper? Meaning the people who are not operating with the best interest, don't think evil like devil. What's happening that people who don't seem to care anything about humankind seem to be getting ahead, and the ones who do care about humankind, just seem to just move slowly? Like, what is that about? And some of us have a distrust of wealth because the deeds of those who the so-called rich, just, you look at it and you say, I wouldn't want to be that person. And we make the connection that somehow having money means having that type of character. So he's asking these questions. He's asking, he wants to make sense of this. And like I said, this book is so deep. It's so, the dialogues that are happening are so powerful. I really would love to take one class and just focus on that, but we don't have time for that. In many ways, the book is a parody of the smug prophets and wise teachers who assure people that everything will be all right. It is a parody of the smug prophets and the wise teachers who teach that assure people that everything will be all right. That all you got to do is follow the law, the Mosaic law, and everything will be all right. And it is, he is taking God to task. Job actually has several charges against God, in a lot of ways puts God on trial. And the narrator makes it clear that God does take these charges seriously, because there's nowhere that God denies Job's charges. And in fact, at one point, the narrator has God say that Job has spoken truly. So no matter how uncomfortable Job may make you feel, you need to understand his claims and not condemn him. And so the story opens by introducing us to Job. He's said to be a blameless and upright man. He fears God and he shuns evil. And that's in chapter 1, verse 1. So the moral virtue and innocence of Job is established in the opening line as a narrative fact. It's like a non-negotiable narrative fact. And yet this Job is to become the victim of a challenge issued by the Satan in the heavenly council. And I say Satan deliberately, the Satan. The Satan is certainly not the devil. There is actually no such thing and no such notion in the Hebrew Bible. The phrase the Satan occurs 4 times in the Hebrew Bible, here in the 22nd chapter of Numbers, and then in the 3rd chapter of Zechariah. The Satan is simply a member of the divine council. It is one of God's minions whose function it is to investigate affairs on earth and to act as a kind of prosecuting attorney. He has to bring evildoers to justice. And it's only in later Jewish and especially Christian thought that the term loses the definite article the, right, from the Satan, which means the prosecutor, which essentially means the prosecuting attorney, and becomes a proper name, Satan, for an enemy or an opponent of God. I'm gonna stop right there because I bet I got some questions. So I have a question that says, were we born to do nothing, or were we born to do everything and choose to only do some things, and at some, as where I am now, that I believe I am eternal and made in the image of God. I am eternal, I am perfect and complete. So I hesitate to even like give an answer, because I think each person has to decide for themselves. I think that there's some clues that we can get from like how the universe is constructed. For example, everything, every living thing starts small and grows big. Plants begin as a seed and then grow big. Trees begin as a seed and then grow big. Babies begin as a seed and then grow big. So it seems that the natural order of how things happen is that we are intended to grow and to expand and to do more. So I don't believe that we're supposed to simply come here and do nothing, but I'm giving you my logic behind it, and then I'm challenging you to develop your own, and borrow from it what works, but really push yourself to think about this on your own. The nature of the universe is lavish abundance, that, you know, the number of roses is 2,000 different species of roses. Like, that's mind-blowing. There are 11,000 different species of moths. There are 20,000 different species of bees, 23,000 different species of trees. I mean, it's, you know, you think about the grains of sand. They are, so the scientists have been discovering what they call exoplanets, and they're looking for these planets where if there's the appearance of water, then there can be life, right? And so that's been the challenge with the planets, and could we inhabit another planet? But they're finding, I read this recently, they're finding so many exoplanets, I think is what they call them. They're finding so many exoplanets that they literally don't have the manpower, the people power to actually study all of them. And so they've got to now pick and choose which ones to study. And so it's like God is lavishly abundant. You know, the vastness of this universe, that God is lavishly, unfailingly abundant. So there must be something to the character of that. So if God is lavishly, unfailingly abundant, then the character of that must inhabit all of the creation. So I think you have to decide what life is about for you, but I'm telling you how I come to this. So how I know God is, I don't necessarily say I know God because I read the Bible. I know God because I experience God, because I observe God's creation, and what I observe, I find confirmation in the Bible, but not that the Bible is the confirmation for my awareness of God. The ability to breathe, to live, the life force that I send, all of that, that is, I don't think that we have this for no reason. And I think that the ancient peoples asked the same question. I think that they too were looking and saying, we can't be this dynamic for no reason. We can't be this dynamic simply for the purpose of just coming, living, and dying. There must be something more to this. Any questions on the Satan? I want to make sure you're clear on that, because I know that the way that many of us, me included, that the book of Job has been taught is as if it is God and the devil. And because we haven't been taught that the evolution of the idea of something called Satan, then we think that when we read it in Hebrew scriptures that that it is speaking about the devil as we understand it in a modern terms, but there was no such concept in the Hebrew Bible. And I'm giving it a different pronunciation because really the responsibility of the Satan was really to be the prosecuting attorney for God. It was like one of God's minions, if you will, to go out and try people for potential crimes and misdemeanors. Constance says, in reference to how you explain the human ability to grow and expand, babies born can do nothing, but as we grow, we have all potential for an extraordinary life. Yes. She said, I like the way you pronounce the word Satan to give it a whole different way of feeling the word. Yes, 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 yes. Job, it explores a deeper question of how one who is faithful ever comes to know God. It explores, and this is where I don't have time because I want to be able to take you guys through the cycles of conversation. And maybe what we'll do, maybe at the top of the year before we get into the New Testament, we'll really dig into Job because it's a really powerful question. And I think that for those of us in New Thought, this is a really powerful book to take a look at because we run into circumstances where people come into our centers and they hear us say, your thoughts create your world. And they look and they say, but what about that baby that just was killed? Or wait a minute, I was raped when I was this age. Are you saying that I caused that to happen? And so it's that these are the kinds of existential questions that Job is digging into. It's like, wait. How is it that someone who is faithful to God, and I don't know that he necessarily comes up with any clear answers, but it gives voice to that. Wait a minute, how, if the law is unfailing, and I am, and life pays a fair wage as we teach, and I don't see how, these are the questions that we get. I don't see how it is that I created this experience. And just understanding the understanding how that happens, and perhaps it'll yield some questions, some answers that we can offer to people who are coming into our centers, who the moment that they hear that you are 100% responsible for your experience, they are making a beeline out the door.
Reverend Sherri?
Yes, go ahead.
They don't stay long enough to get the full.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's yes. Yes. They hear the first little bit and it's like, pew. Or, you get someone who's really dealing with something because, that like right now we've got a lot of stuff going on with mental health. And I feel like every day I have somebody popping up that I hear, meaning celebrities, but it could just be somebody on like TV talking about, anxiety and depression and this and that, and dealing with that. And so the idea that I'm in charge of my experience when I have these episodes of these overwhelming experiences of anxiety and depression and fear and sadness and you name it, how is it? Like, I feel like we need a response to that. These are the questions that we need to be thinking about and helping to language how this works, more than just, you are the master of your fate. I think that's good. I think, yes, let me challenge you. You are the master of your fate. But I think that, I think that people want deeper information. I think we're beyond just, accept it because the minister says it. I think we're in a season where we're going to really need to explore, how do we work? How do we integrate with the mental health community? How do we support someone who, for them, the anxiety is very real? Because the moment they walk into a crowded area and the feelings start kicking up inside of them, I'm not thinking about what the minister said on Sunday. The author's reply is that no one relates to God on the basis of justice or equal rights. This is such a simplification, y'all. All right, we're just gonna go with it because I got to keep going. We still got 3 more books to do. Okay. So the author's reply is that no one relates to God on the basis of justice or equal rights. The book of Job teaches that from the midst of doubt and questioning comes trust. That at some point you have, at some point you have to surrender to what you don't know and just trust. Job is constructed like a dramatic play. For example, I'm gonna pull up my notes. So the book has 2 primary elements. So first we have a prose story that provides a framework for the book, and that's chapters 1 and 2. And then it returns in chapter 42 at the end of the book. But into this prose framework, a large poetic section of dialogue and speeches has been inserted. So there are 2 main literary components. Now, the prose framework concerning a scrupulously righteous man named Job afflicted by horrendous calamity was probably a standard ancient Near Eastern folk tale of great antiquity. The story isn't set in Israel. It's not about an Israelite. It's set in Edom. Job is an Eastern magnate who dwells in the country of Uz, not an Israelite. But the Israelite author has used this older ancient Near Eastern legend about a man named Job for his own purposes. So it would be, I guess, kind of like there was a story that Jordan had that I thought was hilarious. Very, very cute. So we all know the story of Goldilocks and 3 bears. The 3 bears have left home. Goldilocks gets into their house and she eats the porridge. She jumps in the bed. They come home, they find her in the bed. So this story that Jordan has, I got some background noise somewhere. This story that Jordan has is the bears come home, they find their house. Oh, number 5. Hold on, Candace. Number 5 is justice or equal rights. Justice or equal rights. The bears come home, they find their house ransacked because Goldilocks has been in there. And Papa Bear sends Baby Bear out and he says, go find her. Go find her. And so Baby Bear comes back. He saw her go into a house and he's like, Papa, I know where she is. So they go over and they find this house that is empty. And they're like, you know what? We're going to do to her what she did to us. So they go in and they ransack her house the way that she ransacked theirs. And she comes back home and she looks around and she's just like in awe, like, what? And they're like, yeah, how do you feel? How does it feel to have your house ransacked? And she throws her head back and starts laughing. He's like, what are you laughing about? She's like, this ain't my house. And then all of a sudden they look out the window and they see a wolf coming home. and they start tipping out the back door. That's kind of how Job is. It takes an existing story, which is this testing by the Satan, the prosecuting attorney, and then it puts it in this framework because the story ends and then you get all of this other dialogue and commentary on top of it. My point is that it's taking an existing story that's like maybe a common, very well-known story, and then it's spinning it and going in a completely different direction. So the suffering and injustice that characterize the world have baffled humankind for millennia. The book of Job provides no answers, but it does offer a stern warning to avoid the temptation to blame the victims by assuming their wickedness, or the error of blaming God by assuming God is wicked. So it kind of just lands somewhere in the middle with you need to trust God, or you need to trust, essentially. So the outline, chapter 1 and 2, is a folk tale about how God tested Job. Chapters 3 through 31, there's this dialogue between Job and three friends over the meaning of divine justice. The part 3 is an entrance of a fourth adversary, Elihu, who challenges both the friends and Job, and that's chapters 32 to 37. And then chapter 38 to 41, God appears and recites the power and marvels beyond human understanding that show Job's arrogance. And then finally, chapter 42, the last verse 7 through 17, God restores Job to his greatness. And so that's the book of Job. So yeah, we'll dig into Job more after the holidays. So the book of Psalms, excuse me. The book of Psalms contains the principal collection of religious lyric poetry in the Bible. It consists of 151 poems, most of which are prayers addressed to God. The Psalms are 150 prayer poems. That's what goes in that first blank, prayer poems. There were 150 prayer poems. They were intended to be sung or accompanied by music, and they don't seem to have any special order or theme development. It's just, it's like a book of songs, but it's not in any particular order. There are 6 major types of psalms. You have hymns of praise. You have thanksgiving hymns. You have individual laments. You have community laments. You have royal psalms that are honoring either Yahweh or an earthly king as God's deputy. And if you remember, part of the Deuteronomistic point of view was this idea, or this royal idea of the king being an intercessory. And the king would take on the name Son of God, the king being an intercessory between God and the people. So the Psalms might sing praises to God, but it also might sing praises to God's son on earth, which would be the king. And then you have wisdom psalms, and that's a typo there. I got wisdom twice. It should just be wisdom psalms. Other smaller types can also be identified. So you have a wedding song. You have a processional song for entering the temple. And then you have festival songs. Most of the Psalms have a similar structure, and these are the elements. Number 1, you have an address to God. So if you think about the 8th Psalm, it starts out when it reaches out to God. It has the lament, if it's a lament, part of it. It has a confession of trust in God. It has an exclamation of certainty. And finally, a vow of praise. If you go and you look at the 91st Psalm, it follows this completely. The song of he who abides in the shadow of the Almighty, I shall say to my God and my refuge, in him I will trust. And and then it's this confession of what is happening, and it's this exclamation of like what of certainty, what I believe, and then it is a vow, I'm going to praise you forever. or the 23rd Psalm. That's another one. The Psalm, meaning the 150 prayer poems, they have been organized into 5 books of Psalms so that the Psalter will match the Pentateuch in shape. The Pentateuch has the 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And so there are 5 books for the book of Psalms to match the Pentateuch, to match that 5. So it's a repeat thematically of that 5. And this is the outline. I said this in the beginning, we were talking about the wisdom literature. Most of the Psalms really tell us very little about the time and circumstance of their composition. The Psalms are a microcosm of the religious insights and convictions of ancient Israelites. Some of them were composed as much as 3,000 years ago, and yet they can be inspiring or can feel relevant to contemporary readers. So the first book 1 it's an early collection of Davidic hymns, and that is Psalm 1 to Psalm 41. Psalm 1 to Psalm 41. Book 2, it is a northern collection of hymns, and the way they distinguish between whether it was a northern collection versus a southern collection is always, are they friendly to practices that were happening in the north? If they were friendly to practices that were happening in the north, then it is believed that they were written by somebody who was a northern writer, and northern being the northern kingdom. After the fall of Israel, there are no more writings from the northern kingdom. The second book is a northern collection of hymns, so speaking about those 10 northern tribes, and that is Psalm 42 to Psalm 72. Book 3 is a collection from the temple singers. It's a collection of the temple singers, and so that's Psalm 73 to Psalm 89. The book 4, these are Psalms from a royal collection, Psalms 90 to 106. And then the closing selection is a second and expanding Davidic royal collection. And that is the 107th Psalm to the 150th Psalm. Now, the book of Proverbs is the classic book of wisdom. Even though the book probably reached its final form only in post-exilic times, a great deal of it is much older. The chief aim of Proverbs seems to be the inculcation of wisdom as a means to social tranquility and a happy life. It's all about mastering life. Solomon's reputation for wisdom was so great that Israel considered him the founder of their wisdom tradition. Many of the wise sayings were probably collected at Solomon's command. Others came much later, in the time of King Hezekiah of Judah, and still others came from other wise teachers and kings. This is in regards to just as a couple of notes here. There are many affinities between Proverbs and Egyptian and Canaanite wisdom literature, which suggests that Israel assimilated wisdom literature from the wider environment. So this material is not exclusive to the Jewish community. The chief aim of the Proverbs, again, is to help people develop wisdom for social tranquility and a happy life. It's all about mastery. Young people should learn to master their impulses. They should lead productive and sensible lives. Many of the maxims are intended to educate sons. A good deal of the first 9 chapters can be compared with some Egyptian writings that we have from the 3rd millennium. The Egyptian teaching of Amenemopet, or the Babylonian councils of wisdom. These are tremendous parallels between these works. But the first 9 chapters warn against the seduction of foreign women, and they urge young men to pursue wisdom. And wisdom here is figured almost hypothesized as an attribute or a characteristic that's almost put into a concrete human form. So wisdom is thought of as like a virtuous woman who promises insight and counsel. This woman was created before all other created things, and wisdom, again, figured as a woman, assisted Yahweh in the creation, in the ordering of the universe. So wisdom was with God at that time. It was Sophia. The wise sayings that appear in Proverbs usually are like short 2-line sentences where the second line runs parallel in some way to the first. For example, Proverbs chapter 22, verse 1, it's a classic feature of biblical poetry in general. It says, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches and favor. I skipped over something. Well, anyway, let's keep going. The basic theme of the book is that at the heart of all wisdom stands fear of the Lord. So Proverbs tries to link wisdom with reverence for God and obedience to God. In chapter 1, verse 7, it says, the fear of the Lord, or reverence, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. Or chapter 3, verses 5 through 8, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding. Wisdom guards one from evil. So the wise person accepts the sufferings with which God is disciplining him. Chapter 3, verse 12, for Yahweh reproves or disciplines him whom he loves, as a father, the son in whom he delights. The overall purpose of learning Proverbs is to master life. So the book of Proverbs is almost smug. It has smug certainty that the righteous and the wicked of the world receive what they deserve in this life. And there's a complacency here, there's an optimism that God's just providence and a moral world order are presuppositions that it doesn't seem to question. The wise person's deeds are good and will bring him happiness and success. The foolish person's deeds are evil and they are going to lead to failure and ruin. And the key is that a truly wise person knows that the world is essentially coherent. It's ethically ordered. There are clear laws of reward and punishment that exist in the world. And so you get, this is Proverbs, remember, but Job it comes against that. You've got someone who basically followed everything that he was supposed to do. And yet he suffers enormous calamity. So again, I want you to get that these books are presenting alternating is the word I'm looking for, alternating points of view. They're not presenting the same point of view. That with Proverbs is like, listen, follow the law and you're good. If you don't have happiness and joy in your life, it's because you've got some error somewhere. This insistence on the basic justice of the world and the power of wisdom or fear of the Lord to guarantee success and security was one strand of ancient Israelite thought, and it reaches crystallization in the book of Proverbs. It was available as a response to or an explanation of the catastrophes that have befallen the nation. We've seen it at work in the Deuteronomistic school, which was this unwillingness to relinquish the idea of a moral God in control of history and preferring to infer the nation's sinfulness from its suffering and calamity. Better to blame the sufferer, Israel, and so keep God in the system of divine retributive justice intact. But it's precisely this formulaic and conventional piety that gets challenged in the book of Job, and we'll see in the book of Ecclesiastes. In Job, we find the idea that suffering is not always punitive. It's not always about you were wicked. It's not always explainable. And this is the first of several subversions of the fundamental biblical principles that we encountered, in Job. So again, these are presenting different points of view. not all saying the same thing. The Proverbs invited reflective thought and new discoveries of its meanings. The Proverbs invited reflective thought and new discoveries of its meaning. And so in the outline, what you can see is that Proverbs values hard work and diligence and warns against excessive sleep and sex and wine. Proverbs recommends honesty in your business affairs and kindness and loyalty, impartiality, sobriety and humility, restraint and sincerity. Wealth is very nice, but it's not to be desired at the cost of calmness and peace. And so there are 5 sections. So you've got the Proverbs of Solomon from chapters 1 to 22. You've got the sayings of the wise from middle of 22 to chapter 24. Chapters 25 to 39, you've got more Proverbs of Solomon that were copied by the men of Hezekiah. In chapter 30 is the sayings of Agur, I may be mispronouncing that, son of Jacob, and that's an oracle. And then in chapter 31, you've got the sayings of King Lemuel, an oracle. Okay. She says, maybe we can discuss Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon after the first of the year, along with whatever we missed tonight. What do you think? Yes, I'm willing to go there. Let's finish this part out because I want to make sure you guys have all the information because we're on the last page basically. But we definitely will pick up Job because I think Job is fascinating. The book of Ecclesiastes. So the Hebrew name is Qoheleth. Ecclesiastes, which means Ecclesiastes, it's a second attack on the optimism and piety of conventional religion. So think of Ecclesiastes as speaking against the book of Proverbs. The book is mostly in the first person, and there's a third person introduction and a little epilogue. Ecclesiastes is also called Qoheleth and is considered the most skeptical book in the Bible. The word Qoheleth is Hebrew for a preacher. The Hebrew word for preacher. The author's theme is vanity of vanities. All is vanity. All is vanity. It teaches that futility and emptiness result from the constant human searching for the meaning of life. Basically, you ain't gonna find it, so stop. Let it go. The author admits that God does direct all things, but we cannot know what God is doing or why. The proper response is to enjoy what God gives. And then in the Song of Solomon, for many people, the Song of Solomon is actually the most surprising book to be included in the Hebrew canon because it is a very beautiful and very erotic love song that celebrates human sexuality and physical passion. So this is the third book that's attributed to Solomon. He seems to be more the model to follow than its author. It shows signs of being worked and reworked through many centuries. At the oldest level are love poems, perhaps wedding songs that go back to the time of Solomon. At the latest level are Persian and Greek phrases that indicate additions after the exile. So this is how they're able to say when this appeared or you know, that it's it took time to develop because they can see things. It would be like somebody reading a story and it's got cell phones in it. So you know that, well, it's got to be at a time when cell phones existed, even though it might be a story set in 1950. It is accepted as an allegory describing the love of Yahweh for Israel as a beloved bride. Questions? Yay, we did it. So yeah, we'll pick up with Job because Job is awesome. Any questions? Thoughts, comments?
Reverend Sherri,
Yes.
this was fantastic. This was wonderful. Oh, this was great.
Yay.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. This has been a wonderful. Wait till we get to the Christian scriptures, because that's when it's really going wear you out then, because it's so much stuff that that we've been taught that we just never question. Just never question. And so there's evident, like, stuff in our own Bible. You don't even have to go to outside sources. It's already in the Bible, but it's how we've been taught to look at the story and it's so hard to see something different. I was listening to an interview that Reverend Galen did with, I don't know this guy's name, but he's a Unity minister. And he said something I'd heard before, but it just brought it back to my awareness, is that we've been given a way to look at the story of Jesus. And the way that we've been taught to look at the story of Jesus is that the cross is the most important factor in Jesus's life, but not all of the other things that Jesus did. Those were leading up to this singular act, and that it's like, you know, if you took someone, I want to find somebody Martin Luther King, it would be like, Martin Luther King, he had his life, he lived his life, he did the things that he did, and the people who were studying his life afterwards really romanticized his death. What's up, baby? He died? Okay. Really romanticized his death, and basically started wearing rifles around their neck. Like, you gotta wait. And you gotta wait. Just gotta wait. I know, give me 1 second, okay? It would be like people looking at the life of Martin Luther King and simply focusing on his death on April 4th, 1968. And so it's like you miss all the other stuff that he did, or you downplay it because the emphasis is on how he died. And we're all walking around with, rifles on our neck as a piece of jewelry. It's not that the cross isn't important, but is it the most important thing in a life of a man who was giving you ethical principles about how you should live your life? So anyway, I find it fascinating. So, and so this work is just to try to pull that lens off, not even to give you a new lens to look through, but just to try to separate you from the lens that you've been given. And it's fascinating. So thank you guys. Have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful holiday. I got to look at my calendar. I did not sit down with a calendar to figure out when we're going to be back, but I know we're going to take off the month of January because we've got a huge retreat we're doing with our leaders at a church that I've got to get through. But I think we'll be back at the top of February. So we'll have like a 6-week break. Any questions, anything before we go?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Want to say Merry Christmas?
Merry Christmas.
Thanks.
All right.
Merry Christmas, Jordan.
They did not love me.
Oh, we know you.
Yeah, we know who you are. Merry Christmas, Jordan. We love you.
All right.
Merry Christmas.
Take care.
This is
All right,
Jordan and Reverend Sherri.
Thank you. I see your message, Andrea. That's going to be awesome, February 1st. Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
That's Awesome, awesome, awesome.
Love
All
you.
Good night, everybody. Love you guys.
Bye.